Morning, everybody. It's so great to see you all. How are you all? It is one of those days. I just love these days. The sun is shining. The clocks have changed. Tonight's going to be really light. The seasons are changing. It's a day that celebrates women. What is there not to like about today? It is such a good day today. And if you're new here or it's your first time here, you're so welcome. It's great to have you here. My name's Ros, and for those of you that don't know me, I have been part of this church for a really, really long time. I work as a GP in Gateshead, which is an enormous privilege, and I didn't actually grow up in a family that went to church at all, so I'm still slightly in shock that I'm still here after all these years. And if you're here because you're a friend of or family of Rebecca or Izzy, you're so welcome here too, and a special welcome to you. It's so good that you're here to support these brand new people, these amazing girls and their families as they step into their lives. And, you know, I always feel a bit emotional when it's baby blessings, because you get this amazing glimpse into the beauty of family. You know, you kind of get this glimpse into a real life family. You see the preciousness of life. And the love and the care and the pain that it takes to mother and to father, and the joy and the pain of having brothers and sisters. It made me laugh this morning when somebody prayed for Izzy that there wouldn't be too much conflict amongst brothers and sisters. And in these glimpses of family, we see in sharp focus that family is such a precious thing. And somehow we're all longing for family. You know, in one way or another, we and the whole world are longing for family. And at the moment, as a church, we're in the middle of this preaching series, Words from the Cross. And as we approach Easter, we're focusing in on the very last words of Jesus before he died. And, you know, we're going to talk about last words, but first words and last words are such an event. You know, the first words of a child are such an important event. We strain to hear them. They're so cute. We note them down. And Gareth and Fiona were telling me earlier that Becca's first word was burr. I don't know if you can tell what that means. She's a classic pandemic baby. She had absolutely minimal human contact, and so the only living creatures that she could see were birds outside the window, and she used to stand on the windowsill and just point, you know, day after day, burr, burr, at all the birds. And Izzy's most frequently used early phrase, Stephen Susie said, was more please, which I think is pretty much perhaps setting her up for success in life. And it's the same right at the end of life. You know, our first words are precious, but so are our last words, you know, if we're lucky enough to hear them. The last words of someone we love perhaps have even more significance. And as the person we love approaches their death, we hope that they might say something important, or that we might be able to hear that. And very often they do. You know, we hold their hand, we reach out and we strain to hear what it is that they're saying. And so often they're words of love and reconciliation, forgiveness. Things like, I want you to know that I've always loved you. Will you look after your mum for me? I forgive you. Will you forgive me? And the death of Jesus is no different. His last words. And over this series, what we're doing as a church is we're straining in to hear what it was that he said to us just as he died. You know, those really important last words, the final desires for the people that he's leaving behind. And it's just so hard, you know, now these days to put ourselves there. But his dying is agony. It's cruel, barbaric, unjust. Just imagine crowds shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." You know, the closest of his friends betray him, deny him. He's carrying his cross. He's whipped, beaten. A crown of thorns pushed down onto his head. He's hanging there, nails hammered through the bones and the tendons of his hands, naked. And thank God, John, his friend, is there. And this is what he wrote. Standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother, and his mother's sister, so Jesus' aunt, then Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And when from the cross Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." And then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. And these words these are the last words of Jesus that we're straining to hear today together. And I believe there are two things that God's saying to us in them. We're family, and woman, he sees you. So we're family, and woman, he sees you. So let's start with we're family. And it was great at the beginning when James got us to all look at each other, one big family, because in his greatest agony, Jesus is looking out at the people around him. There are the two criminals hanging on either side of him, the soldiers that have just gambled for his clothes, and there's John, his friend, and there are some women, and we're not sure exactly how many women there are, but there's definitely quite a few, including Mary, his own mother, his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene, his dear friend. So lots of Marys in there. But just imagine the agony of this moment for Mary as a mother. She carried him in her womb. She nurtured him, and she knew closer than anyone that he was somehow, this boy was somehow God's own son. And now she's watching him die, tortured, rejected. And even at that moment of his awful death, his greatest agony, Jesus is somehow able to look out, and he sees her. He sees his mother in her agony, a mother watching her own son die in completely horrific circumstances. Jesus is always looking out. And from the cross, he says to his mother, "Woman!" And to us, in our society, that might sound actually really derogatory if we were to say that out loud like that, or even aggressive, but it's not. When he says woman, he's saying dear woman, valued, cherished woman, your mother. And next to his mum, Jesus sees his friend, John, his dearest friend. And he says, "Behold," which just means look. He says to the two of them, "Look at each other, you two. I can see something that you can't yet see. Woman, behold your son. John, behold your mother." And that's it. In this moment of death, he creates all of a sudden new family with the people he loves the most, his own mother and John. And really, at that very moment, he creates the church, new family. That's the beginning of the church, John and his mother. How amazing that in his death, a new family begins. It's a small family, but also in his death, at that moment, the church begins. A much, much, much bigger family, a global family. And of course, this is us. It's who we are. We're family. We're not biologically related, many of us, but we are drawn together somehow in the death of Jesus to create one new family. And when Andy and I ask our three kids, Josie, Jessica and Zach, what they like best about being part of this church, it's this. It's family. They've loved mucking about with you or growing up with being a sense of a part of a community, a family where they belong, watching people go through all the stages of life. They love it. They love sharing life with you all. They love being part around you, being part of a family. So look around you at this room. Just look around you. There's so many people here. The truth is that whether you've been part of this church for 10 minutes or 10 years, you belong to this family. You can find a home here. You've got brothers and sisters. You've got mothers and fathers, people who'll love you and care for you. And you've got people here who need your care. So Jesus is saying this to us. Look at each other, because I can see something you can't yet fully see. Here are your brothers, your sisters, your mothers, your fathers, your daughters, and your sons. And true functional family is a place of love and safety and flourishing. Whether you're young or old, whether you're a newborn baby or facing death, whether you're male or female, a family is a place where you have home. It's where you're known, where you're loved. It's where you're free to be yourself. You've got an incredibly valuable contribution to make. And family isn't always easy. We all know that. But it is a place where you commit and you persevere and you forgive. And there's such a challenge for us here, because it says in the passage, from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. You know, from that very hour of his death, it's immediate. There's no waiting around. You know, our lives and our hearts and our homes wide open to our new family. God's saying to us all, let's get on with this. If for some reason you're holding back, for some reason from friendship or community, why don't you start straight away from this hour? And I have to be honest that in cold, wet, you wouldn't believe it today, but British culture, after a hard day at work, I find it very easy to get home, put my pajamas on, and double lock the front door from the inside. But God's challenging us. He wants us to open all our doors, our hearts and our homes. And God's challenging us to see each other in a new way as family, to share life and to share home. And I was so moved a few weeks ago in the early days of the conflict in Ukraine to see how the people of Germany, you know, responding right early on, welcoming those escaping Ukraine straight into their homes and into their families. There were crowds of people at Berlin Station holding up signs saying things like, you know, 1 room for mother and child. I'll have 6. Stay as long as you want. You know, welcoming people right in. True community, precious family. How are we going to build it here in this church? Maybe you're holding back from joining a city group, but who are you going to welcome into your heart and your home? Who in this room? Who out there? Who beyond these walls are you going to welcome in? Who needs your care and your love? Because, you know, it all depends on how we see each other. And Jesus wants us to see each other in a new way. It's an instruction to us. Look at each other and see what it is that I see, because he can see something we can't quite see. You know, how is it that we see other people? Are we looking to see the person that Jesus sees? Do we see family? Do we see beyond all the barriers and the bias that we sometimes find between us? Privilege, might be race, sexuality, even gender. And we've just finished a great preaching series, which I loved, focusing on some of these elephants in the room. But let's face it, gender is a big one in the world and in the church too. So, woman, he sees you. So let's go back to this group of women at the cross. This group of women, they're all there with Jesus because they're devoted to him. They totally love him. They're some of his closest friends. And they are really brave to be there. It was not easy to be there. But they're also there because they can be. Because just to be associated with Jesus was a really dangerous thing. And for men, perhaps the stakes were just too high. To be seen as a man at the cross of Jesus was actually a really dangerous thing. You'd be risking your life to be seen there. So possibly quite understandably, many of the disciples were hiding to save their lives and not able to show their faces. And the commentators think that perhaps John was really young and that perhaps made it easier for him to be there and therefore less risk. But in that culture, women were of much lesser value than men. And so they were less likely to be arrested and much less likely to be thought of as a threat. And perhaps just not considered important enough to be a threat. And in a society where women were largely dependent on men and had no legal rights or power, the Bible is just full of moments where Jesus sees women. He really does. The Bible, I'm going to say it again, the Bible is just full of moments where Jesus sees women. He sees women as they truly are, equal and valuable. And it's easy to look back from where we are now in the 21st century and not appreciate how completely radical Jesus was in the way that he treated women. He gave value and dignity to women in a way that those watching would have found completely shocking, outrageous. There was a woman who the Bible describes as having lived a particularly sinful life. And we're not told any details of that, but she ends up in Simon, a Pharisee's house with Jesus. And she's weeping, she's crying. Her tears, as they pour out, they wet his feet. And she wipes his wet feet with her loose hair, loving him, serving him. A woman, a particularly sinful woman, kissing his bare feet. She pours expensive perfume out all over his feet. And those watching are totally outraged. They can't bear it. And what does Jesus do? He turns to face this incredible woman at his feet and looking at her, says to Simon, who's over here, "Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house and you didn't give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You didn't give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You didn't put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much." Jesus sees her amongst the lowest of the low. He turns to face her. He looks at her and he sees the beauty of her devotion and the value of her life. He loves her. He recognizes her, and then he frees her from her sin. And on another occasion, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues. And there was a woman there that had been completely crippled by a spirit for 18 years, and she was completely bent over. She couldn't straighten up at all. She was just so damaged, so broken, of so little value. What use was she? And do you know what Jesus did? He saw her. In the crowd, he saw her. And when Jesus saw her, he called her forward, and he said to her, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." And then he put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. He sees her and he liberates her. And again, the people watching, the crowds, are completely outraged. Not only is he healing a bent over woman, but it's on the Sabbath day too, the day of rest. And in their eyes, he's breaking every single rule. And Jesus responds to their indignation by dignifying her. And this is what he says: "Of course I'd want her to be set free, whatever day it is. She's a daughter of Abraham." And those words are really significant. By calling her that name, a daughter of Abraham, Jesus was saying something completely new. Because until this point, people had only ever really heard of sons of Abraham, never daughters. And the message to the people listening just could not be clearer. This woman is not inferior to you. She is your equal. And to this ears, in that culture, this is completely outrageous news. Jesus is so exciting, isn't he? And it's the same back at the cross as he dies. He's still doing it because this group of women can only be here because perhaps their low status in society makes it safer for them to be in what is a very dangerous place. And Jesus does the same again. In the midst of his pain, he sees. He sees his mother standing there and the disciple he loves. And he cries out, "Look at each other. Do you see what I see?" Even in that very moment of his own suffering, Jesus is seeing the value in Mary and in John and bringing it out. "Woman, behold your son. And John, behold your mother." And there's such mutuality here. A mother gains a son gains a mother. Even as Jesus breathes his last, he's radical. "Look after this woman. Woman, look after this man. I see you. Look after each other." And I honestly could go on and on, but I won't. The dignity and the honor and the care that Jesus repeatedly shows to women he meets in a society that just didn't do that. And sadly, 2,000 years later, our society today still needs to hear this message of Jesus to women in the 21st century as well as the first. Because despite huge amounts of progress, this is tragically still a world where in many ways women are not safe, not free, and not valued. And at times it's easy to feel like we're doing much better with all of this. But then there are these horrible occasions where reality is brought into really sharp focus. Moments like the murder of a woman, really just like us, Everard, walking home from a meal with a friend. And the shocking realization that so many of us have been on the receiving end of completely unacceptable behavior too. Me too. And as if this wasn't bad enough, we know that women across the whole world are completely trapped in homes and places by people that abuse them, hide them, traffic them, exploit them, and silence them. Woman, he sees you. Dear, valued, cherished woman, he sees you. And if we, with all our privileges, don't stand up for these women, who will? And if we as women don't stand up, who will? What would Jesus do? And let's not pretend that the church hasn't got a lot of work to do here too. Some places more than others. Right here and around the world, in our local family and in our global family. Because I guess, just like any other family, the church hasn't always done things well, and has actually caused all manner of hurt and pain or restriction, and continues to do so. And so I'm not going to pretend that any of this is easy. I do really care so much about all this, and I have done for a very long time. I know many of you do too as well. As I hope you can see, I passionately believe God really cares about this too. And personally, I've really wrestled with all these issues. And I found this area of church life really challenging at times, both locally and globally. It's felt like an elephant in the room. But I want you to know this morning that you are part of a church that cares deeply about these things. You are part of a church whose leaders are actively engaging and care deeply about what the Bible and history and church culture all say about women. And I've had the privilege of being involved in recent conversations with our elders team. It's made all the more interesting, in inverted commas, by the fact that I'm actually married to one of them. But it has been such a positive experience. And I am so encouraged by what I can see and what I can hear, which is a clear commitment to change and to deal with this elephant. Woman, dear, valued, cherished woman, I want you to know that this is a church that sees you, because I read of and also know a Jesus who sees women and dignifies them in the midst of a culture that did neither. I read of and know a Jesus who cares about freedom and came to set all men and women free. And I read of and know a Jesus who creates family, equality, and partnership. I read of and know a Jesus who so loved the church that he gave himself up for her. Jesus, whose death alone deals with all this mess, the sin and the injustice of everything once and for all. And it's only in his death that lasting change arrives. I read of and know a Jesus who says to women that they don't need to stay bent over and restricted, but can stand up tall. I read of and know a Jesus that says to our daughters that they can grow up unafraid to be themselves, strong, able to praise God with their whole hearts, their tears, their loose hair, and their whole lives in passionate devotion to Jesus. And so, dear Becca, dear Izzy, these are the things I pray for you. For my own daughters, Josie and Jess, and for every single woman here, mother or not. We're a family. Every single person has a part to play, including you, whoever you are. Jesus welcomes all of us. Woman, here's your son. Son, here's your mother. Brothers, here are your sisters. Fathers, daughters, all of us. He sees you. Jesus always sees you. Even when you feel hidden, he sees you. Perhaps even especially when you feel hidden, he sees you. And when he sees you, he turns towards you and he calls you sons and daughters of Abraham. You know, we're his family. He values you, gives you dignity. He liberates each one of us, frees us to stand up tall and praise God with our hearts, with all our heart, all our mind, and all our soul. And then, as completely free people, men and women, he sends us all out into all the world with what is incredibly good news. James, why don't you come?